Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is the 8th and last installment of the Mission Impossible series. Allegedly. Look, Tom Cruise, we all know, is crazy as fuck. He might want to revisit this like 10 years down the line when he's in his 70s, like, no, I'll do it again. Well, I mean, I say 10 years, but there was only like a 5-year gap between 3 and 4 when people thought maybe 3 was the last one, so it could just be 5 years from now. Either way, right now, at the very least, they are saying this is the last one. This movie takes place a couple months after the end of Dead Reckoning. At this point, every government in the world is terrified of the rogue AI known as the Entity. It has, infested every corner of the internet. It's threatening to get in and get control of nuclear arsenals, and now every government is terrified. And Ethan Hunt, once again, of course, played by Tom Cruise, now only has 3 days to bring an end to this thing, kill it, like he likes to say, and hopefully save the world once again. My exposure to Mission Impossible was, of course, through Ghost Protocol. At that point, I think I was at the right age to, recognize what was going on in, the news and what was going to be released in theaters. Tom Cruise was climbing the Burj Khalifa. I was like, what's up with this? Seems to be a part of this pretty well-known and big franchise, Mission Impossible. So the summer before, I ran through all 3 movies, and then later, a couple months after, I saw Ghost Protocol in theaters, and I've seen all the Mission Impossible movies on the biggest screen that I can find. And ever since then, of course, I've enjoyed myself with every single one. And I think it's interesting how they've evolved as well. It's starting off as just a anthology for action directors. You start off with Brian De Palma doing a more paranoid spy thriller, John Woo doing a John Woo movie, and then J.J. Abrams bringing in his own thing, Brad Bird, and then when Christopher McQuarrie wrote some drafts of that script and then directed Rogue Nation, he's been writing and directing all of these since. And I think it's interesting how it's changed from that, but how Christopher McQuarrie himself has also changed as far as leveling up his skills as a director and a writer, bringing these all together and having them a little bit more focused on the interconnectivity of it, especially with these last couple, bringing stuff back. So I was really excited to see how they were going to bring this to an end as somebody who's been a long fan of this franchise. And I gotta say, watching this movie, it still has its moments of fun, with the MI stuff that they have in there that they still do, and of course your comedic relief, some jokes thrown in. You have Simon Pegg, obviously, once again doing a great job as Benji, and then a couple other characters having their time to shine comedically. There's an actress who's new to this movie who not in it a whole lot, but she kind of surprised me with a couple funny things that she did, and I thought that was cool as well. It has those similar moments, but this is also the most dread-induced any of these movies have been. This is a movie where I would say the stakes that they lay out before you, feel like actual threats. As you're watching it in the theater, you yourself are probably man, it feels like this is happening right now, actually. It feels that heightened and that kind of embraced. So many moments where, there's a scene earlier on where, Tom Cruise is talking to, boardroom of people, president played by Angela Bassett, returning as Erica from Fallout. But then there's other sequences where they go back to that, and some of the conversations that they have, it's grim. It's really bleak, and I was kind of taken aback, whoa, at some things that they started to talk about, but they have to kind of start to take seriously. I was geez, man, yeah, talk about bleak, man. This is definitely the bleakest. And speaking of Tom Cruise having that one meeting with them, there's a moment where he's you can kind of hear it. It's a bit more of a tired kind of plea. It's not like Mission Impossible 3's kind of pleading that he does with Philip Seymour Hoffman, but there's still a desperation coming from Ethan Hunt where he's I need you to trust me. I need you to let me do this, please. And God, I really did feel the stakes of this one. So continuing off of where they left off with Dead Reckoning and continuing to grow the threat of the AI, which of course, people are scared about AI in real life as well. I mean, I'm someone as well who, fears for what could happen. I don't want to get too it's just like the movies, but I mean, who knows, it's crazy out there. And so, embracing that and really growing that threat more in this, I think they did a really great job with, as well as, putting Ethan Hunt against that. Ethan Hunt as a character, I feel is, a little bit overlooked. I know a lot of people like to just say oh, it's just Tom Cruise's insert so he can do cool shit. He's just stoic spy guy. And I can't argue with, the Tom Cruise insert stuff. There's definitely he's working in the cool shit that he likes to do as big stunts. Of course, there's a lot of that dialogue dialogue where they're like, he's the only one who can do, he's the best of the best. My favorite is in Rogue Nation, where I'm not going to be able to memorize the whole thing, obviously, but where Alec Baldwin kind of just calls him like the human embodiment of destiny, something like that. And so like they still have some moments like that, but I think just as a character, you go back to that first movie and, watching that, kind of like cocky, like confident spy guy just get rattled as soon as like his team starts dropping like flies and he doesn't know who to trust. And then watching over the course of these other films, he feels responsibility over everything, not just, the stakes of the world, but also his people, whether it be, his family, his loved ones, or the team, which are all kind of the same thing, he feels so much responsibility and care for it. They mention it as well, like he cares just the same for the millions, billions of people out there as one individual. He doesn't like the idea of letting someone die even if it's one person versus a billion or something. He's like, nope, that still will not do. I don't accept that. And I just really love how in this movie there's a couple points also where they try to turn that back on him, where he's like, yeah, remember that one thing you did in one of these other movies? Man, you did that out of like, not necessarily a selfishness, but for somebody that you love. Something that you normally wouldn't do, but you did it because someone you love was at stake. You needed to do this because of this. And now look at where that has gone since then, and tying some stuff back in. They really do try to like make him feel guilty for trying to like save somebody that he loved a long time ago. It's like, God damn, like they're really ringing this character through the ringer. And like I was saying before, like this desperate, tired plea, I just think, Tom Cruise does a really great job of like putting that in all of these movies really with Ethan Hunt. Like the desperation is always there. It's usually kind of masked with a bit more like anger or like urgency, like we gotta get this going, come on, trust me, stuff like that. But I feel like there's always been these moments where, he's still a very talented actor. I know people think like he just does action stuff. He's still a really talented actor. There's these looks that he has on his face sometimes in the middle of action, this like worry, but it's not like so exaggerated. It's like just contained enough where he can like try to focus. It's, that's what, gives you that connection to when he does some of these great stuff. Other than like, I wouldn't want to do that, having that kind of feeling. It gives you that human connection to him as well. And I really liked, his journey here. As far as like the narrative goes, I think if this is the last one, they have a really, really great finale for him. Mostly. I want to blaze through some negatives real quick. There's like definitely some other things I want to talk about positively, but I do want to talk about some of the negatives now, just because my experience with the movie was like getting started and I'm pumped up. This was one of my most anticipated of the year, and in the first couple minutes, something definitely felt off, and there was kind of this worry for a little bit. I was like, oh no, did they fuck this? You know what I mean? Like, I was genuinely kind of worried, and I'll explain why. Some of the dialogue in the first, 30 minutes or so, like somewhere around that, it takes a while before they get to, like, the title sequence stuff, so about 30 minutes or so, there's some dialogue. I can excuse, like, the mission briefing, because even in the context of it's how they open the movie, they're recapping it's their way to recap stuff and try to, like, plead with Ethan Hunt, like, we're stressing the urgency of this, so we want to, try to glaze you with how appreciative we are of what you've done, and everything, here's everything you've been through, and they show a montage. So I'm kind of fine with that in the context of that, the dialogue, but there's other points in this opening act where I was like, man, some of this dialogue is just too on the nose, it's too expository, but it's stuff that I already know. I think that's the thing that got me most of all. It's like, I feel like even in this movie, you're like explaining stuff that I'm already getting, and it definitely felt very first draft, like just get all the information that we need and then we'll finesse it later. And then they just never went back. And I hate to say that about Christopher McQuarrie, a writer I really admire, but it definitely, that's just the way it came across, because it did not feel very natural. There's also a couple things character-wise, and it goes into a couple different categories for me. One of them is, it seems like with three characters in particular, they left them in a place in Dead Reckoning where they were like, okay, part of their character journey is that they're going to start doing this. And it's not necessarily that I have a problem with. It's the fact that in the opening, it just feels like a mad dash to not necessarily undo the end of Dead Reckoning, but just to, get them past some other like character development points. And it felt a little too choppy in that regard. I'm not saying they needed a completely different movie to explore these things. I was just like, I think this just needs a different opening. In fact, that's what I was thinking about at a certain point in my head on the drive back. I was like, I think they probably could have rewritten that in a different way, and it would have been really satisfying before they hit the title card sequence. There's also two brand new things that they introduced for two specific characters. One of them is kind of more minor, but it's still kind of like, well, I don't remember this, and now you're acting like it's a bigger deal, but whatever. But then there's another thing where I was like, that's completely new for this character, and, I'm not necessarily against it, but it is kind of like they're not like sitting with it, letting us feel it emotionally, because it is a bit more of like an emotional development, and they don't really let you sit with that. It's just this abrupt thing they throw at you. The rest of the character's, story is fine. It's actually really good, and I like the way they incorporated it, throughout the rest of the film, kind of being the emphasis point for some things. But I didn't like how this new thing was just abruptly kind of thrown in. And then there's also not necessarily like loose threads at the end of some of them, but just some things that still feel a little unresolved. And I'm only gonna specifically mention Gabriel because I like that villain. I do like Eze Morales' performance. I think I like the fact that he's like kind of having some fun with like fucking with Ethan Hunt, and I like that there's a bit of personal backstory and connection there to establish that. I don't necessarily love that the flashback that they gave you, the vague, clip of that flashback with them in Dead Reckoning, that's really the extent of what they're going to tell you. When I saw Dead Reckoning, I was like, this is something they're going to come back to because it's left a little too vague. They're going to come back to this. And then they did not. And I was like, I'm still kind of thinking like, what specifically was happening in that content? Like, I want to know more about that relationship, really, is what I'm saying, with Ethan and Gabriel, that is now going to be left completely unexplored, unless I'm missing something. I think that's the thing also, is like that maybe there is a part of me that just got so lost in like some of the exposition. Maybe I missed an odd line or something, I don't know. And the last thing I'll mention is that there's two like hand-to-hand, fight sequences in that first 30 where I was like, it feels something, once again, it's like, it's hard to pinpoint exactly whether it's like a blocking thing or just editing. I don't know if it's camera. Something felt off where I was like, this isn't as strong as I think it should be. So once again, all of these things were kind of front loaded at the start of the movie though. So there was a part of me that was like, oh no, please don't let this be a bad finale. Don't let this be the rise of Skywalker, where it just continues to get worse and worse, after some mad dashing through some other plot developments. Luckily, though, once a certain emotional beat happens, and that scene does really work, I think the movie settled into a rhythm that I was like, okay, I think now we're at a point where we're at the movie they wanted to make. I think they just had to deal with some things with the two-parter aspect of this, and maybe that can still be a criticism levied against them, that they didn't necessarily think about it, because it definitely feels like, once again, they're rushing to get to the movie they actually wanted to make. But maybe now that they're past that part, we're in a good place, and that's how it was for me at that point. I was like, okay, it doesn't absolve any criticism of the opening 30 minutes. Because it still exists. But I think we're on a better path now with this. And, all the narrative stuff that I had mentioned before with Ethan Hunt and the growing stakes and, the comedic work done with the, other characters, the team building, the action sequences, that's when it all really kicks into high gear. Especially these two huge moments that are like, this is definitely not as action-packed as the other ones, but they put it all into these two huge sequences. And they're, some of the best, if not just the best of the entire franchise. At least that's how I was feeling watching them. One moment in particular, we'll get to the other one, but one moment in particular they haven't shown a whole lot of in promo is, Ethan Hunt, with his diving gear, and he's, gonna go to the submarine. That's where they left Dead Reckoning. It's like, he's still gotta find out where, the source of the entity is, which is in that sub. So he's kind of traversing through it, and that slow building tension, there's water slowly filling in. You're not quite sure how long he really does have down there, what could go wrong. There's, potentially some other dangers, not necessarily like, human dangers, but just that abandoned sub, any dangers left there, mechanically, just some weaponry there. It's like this slow ratcheting tension where I was like, fuck, dude, this is perfect, the way they have spaced this out so much. In fact, this in combination with the biplane stuff, which is what they're promoting the most, and yeah, that is stomach dropping. Like, so many points where I was like, I wasn't completely looking away, like it was like a horror, like, gore fest, and I was like, I can't look at that. I was like, kind of like still playing back, like, holy shit, he's a madman. I know, like, he's probably wired and they had to digitally erase that, and maybe he was safe, but shit, it looks terrifying, and I don't know how he does that. Man, it does feel a lot, though, these two sequences, like, just the bigger, longer, more perfected versions of kind of what came before. Not to say that those other sequences in other movies were bad or anything, it's just they maybe saw where they could improve and do something even scarier for the audience to get more engaged, and they took those opportunities. I'm thinking specifically the underwater scene in Rogue Nation and the fallout, climbing onto a helicopter stuff. I think they took those ideas and then just reworked them so that it's an entirely new experience, and it's just way scary, at least if you ask me, just watching those sequences. Like, god damn, and they're completely different as well. One of them is like, suspense over like the claustrophobia, and then one is the suspense of just how open the open air is, and if you fall, you're fucked. You know what I mean? God, it was, wow, incredible stuff at that point. Obviously, we know that, McQuarrie and especially Cruise can handle action really well, but those were the moments where I was like, God, it's too bad that this is coming out when there's no stunt category yet, but yeah, this would have definitely won. At least the majority of these movies would have won before. But even the other action sequences that the other characters are involved with, those are really good as well. I enjoyed Palm Clementie's physicality in this. Like, there's a couple, like, kicks that she does and the camera, like, emphasizes the impact of it that I really enjoyed. I also really enjoyed, I mentioned the team dynamic. I really enjoyed the team that they kind of have assembled, and I enjoyed that there is a character that they bring back from another movie. I won't spoil who, because I didn't even fully know myself the play that this character was going to have. So some people might not even know that they're back. But, I was kind of surprised that they joined the team. I thought it was going to be like maybe a quick pop-up or something like, hey, it's me, remember? But no, they joined the team. And I thought that was really cool, a really great idea. And as far as like the legacy of it all, like, this is something that I think works. Using like the other movies to enhance certain beats in here, and to also like, enhance the overall journey of Ethan Hunt, because that's kind of what they're doing as well, especially going back to another one that I kind of specifically can't mention because that was another surprise for me. Anyways, this was really fun at the end of the day. I had a really great time with this. The technical work on display is immaculate. The cinematography looks great. They capture it all very well. They have two new composers working on the music, and I was like, how's this going to go? Because Lauren Balfe had been doing the last two, and I thought, in particular with Fallout, he did some really great work with the tracks on that. But, they did great. These two new guys did really great jobs. It's a technically marvelous film, has some really great performances, some really great sense of stakes, and a really great sense of, the narrative, and trying to bring in the legacy aspect of it to actually enhance the plot and the character journey. Overall, I think they end in a place that I did really enjoy and found satisfying. It is just the first 30 minutes or so contain pretty much the majority of like my issues, and it can be rough. And I can see some people even watching that and going like, I don't even care about the rest, like writing off the rest of the movie. I can kind of see that happening, but I cannot ignore the hard work that they do in not even just the stunt work, just every other, department here, because I do think still that they have a lot of great stuff going on with the narrative and working with your actors and the character stuff. I'm going to give Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning a B-. Like I said, it definitely has its issues. This is a flawed, epic, wonderful conclusion that maybe could have been better. It could have been to the heights of McQuarrie's previous MI installments. But that being said, fun is fun, good is good. I had a really good time with this despite the growing pains in the start. But if you've seen Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, leave your thoughts in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.